So, welcome to today's presentation on Small Steps, Big Change, Self-Compassion Tools for Recovery. My name is Molly, and I'm one of the managers of Mission Initiatives here at the National Eating Disorders Association. I'm so excited to welcome you all here. I'd like to take a brief moment before we get started to talk a little bit about the National Eating Disorders Association and the work that we do. NEDA is a nonprofit organization working to fundamentally change the way eating disorders are understood and treated, and to empower those affected to achieve lasting well-being and recovery. Through our annual campaigns like Eating Disorders Awareness Week, and through our Campus Warriors program and events, we are working to increase public understanding of these complex disorders. We also provide information and resources through the Grace Holland Cosine Resource Center, as well as through our educational programs like the Understanding Eating Disorders presentation and webinars like this one. We also promote early intervention through our screening tool, which has helped over 1 million people and is now available in Spanish. We have also invested in groundbreaking research that helps to develop effective treatments. If you would like to support our work and more programming like this webinar, we'd appreciate any donations, so I'll include the link in the chat later on. Now I'd like to introduce our esteemed presenter, Alex Kasputis. She is a licensed mental health counselor, nationally certified counselor, and a certified eating disorder specialist. She specializes in working with clients who live with eating disorders, mood disorders, a history of trauma, with a commitment to providing LGBTQ+ affirming care. She integrates a range of evidence-based modalities, tailoring her approach to meet the unique needs of each client. If you have any questions during the presentation, please share them in the chat feature, and I'll relay them to Alex at the end of the presentation during a period for questions and answers. So now I'll turn it over to Alex as soon as I stop sharing my screen and let her share.
Thank you so much, Molly. Good evening, guys. Thank you so much for joining on this Tuesday afternoon, depending on where you are. One moment as I get us set up. Does that look good, Molly?
Looks great.
Great. Okay. I will share, for those of us who are just joining, I have an adorable dog, Chase. So if you see a little shadow going on in the background, that's him, just wanting to be involved in all things self-compassion as usual. But I'm so excited to be here with you all this evening. Thank you again to NEDA for hosting me and for hosting this incredible webinar series. As Molly shared, my name is Alex Kasputis. I'm a New York City therapist who specializes in supporting people living with eating disorders. So whether you're personally navigating recovery or here today supporting someone who is, today's session is all about learning practical, doable self-compassion skills that your loved ones can use to support them in recovery. So I'll give you kind of a roadmap for our next hour. We're going to start with taking a brief look at how self-criticism fuels EDs and how self-compassion can help interrupt this cycle. We'll cover the basics, what self-compassion means and why it matters in recovery. I'll be introducing two different skills today, one for more everyday life and one for those harder times or moments when emotions are running really high. We'll talk about how to actually make that shift from noticing you're stuck in self-criticism to accessing a more self-compassionate mindset. And finally, I'll share some resources. So if you want to learn more about self-compassion and integrate it more into your life and recovery, you'll be able to do so beyond today's session. And with that, we can get started. So I want to begin by naming something that's almost universal for people who are living with an eating disorder, which is a critical relationship with self, body, and food. Self-criticism can show up in so many ways when we're living with an ED, through harsh judgments about our appearance, rigid food rules, or punishing thoughts when we don't meet unrealistic standards. And this self critical voice isn't just unkind, it's actually a quite strong reinforcer in maintaining eating disorders. It makes sense that eating disorder behaviors show up in response to self criticism. They can be a way to numb from the thoughts or emotions they bring up, a response to try and quote unquote fix the focus of our criticism, or just as a way to feel some type of control when everything else feels so out of control. However, while behaviors might be providing some temporary relief to the pain of self criticism by making ourselves more numb to the voice, offering a solution, or making us temporarily feel more in control, it never seems to make the self critical thoughts actually go away. Fortunately, it usually makes our self critical voice and ED voice louder because it's reinforcing shame and further disconnecting us from our body's needs. Over time, this cycle can become almost automatic. Our self critical voice and ED behaviors start to feed one another, keeping us trapped in patterns that move us further away from self understanding and the care we actually need. And this is really what brings us here today to discuss and start to learn how we can begin building a different relationship and way of relating to ourselves, body, and food. Self compassion offers this opportunity. By bringing in compassion, we can start to shift the way that we relate to ourselves from one of judgment to one of understanding and care. When we respond to ourselves with compassion rather than criticism, we create the space to understand the function of our ED, what it's been trying to help us with or protect us from, and begin exploring other ways to meet those very valid needs without fueling further distress, shame, or behaviors. This shift is really foundational. Without self-compassion, it can be hard to build a sustainable kinder relationship with food and body. Today, we're going to explore how self-compassion can build that foundation, and I'll share, as I mentioned, some specific strategies you can use to practice it in everyday life and recovery. So, before we go any further, I want to hear from you guys. I want you to take a moment to think of a recent time when the ED voice or your inner critic showed up and was loud. How would you describe its tone or the way that it spoke to you? You can drop a word or two in the chat.
Someone is saying loud and telling them they never are going to get better, aggressive, negative, intrusive, harsh, self deprecating, judgmental, cruel. Um, so that's the theme: mean, cruel, relentless.
Yeah. And notice, even despite that theme of cruelty, harshness, or meanness, how familiar that voice can feel. So let's start talking about how we can counter that voice with some self compassion. There are three elements that, when combined, connects us to our innate ability for self-compassion, and I'm going to touch on each briefly. The first is mindfulness. Contrary to popular belief, mindfulness is not just a buzzword. It means intentionally becoming aware of what is present in our current experience without minimizing it or over-identifying with it, meaning we get lost in it and can't see the bigger picture. It's noticing without judgment. Mindfulness is obviously important to self compassion because when we don't know we're struggling or that we have an unmet need, we can't attend to it compassionately. And while the concept of mindfulness can be simple, the practice itself can be challenging, partly because it goes against other natural tendencies, specifically the default mode network. Um, and I promise I'm not going to get too neurological here, but the default mode network is a set of interconnected brain regions. And it gets its name because it's the brain's default pattern of activation when we're not focused on a specific external task. Some of its key functions include constructing a sense of self, reflecting on the past, imagining the future, kind of generally scanning for potential problems. And from an evolutionary standpoint, this is incredibly useful. It allows us to learn from past experiences, anticipate future challenges, and plan how to respond more effectively over time. However, the same system can make it hard to stay present when we're struggling in real time. Instead of noticing our pain as it's happening, the default mode network often pulls us into stories about the past or the future as we try to solve or fix our distress, which can actually amplify our suffering. Mindfulness helps deactivate the activity in the default mode network, especially the parts associated with rumination and self criticism. This shows us that mindfulness isn't just something that happens automatically, it's an intentional practice that helps counter the brain's natural tendency to drift into problem solving, even self criticism, and instead stay present with our experience as it is. One key to understanding mindfulness lies in distinguishing between awareness itself from the contents of our awareness. Mindfulness involves bringing attention to awareness itself rather than merely the contents. And Dr. Neff, who is the pioneer of self compassion, shares a really great metaphor to illustrate this distinction in her first book. So, if you'll allow me, let me paint you a picture. I want you to imagine a red cardinal flying across a clear blue sky. The bird represents a particular thought or emotion we're experiencing, aka the content of our awareness, while the sky represents awareness itself, which holds our thought or emotion. Now, this bird is going to do what birds do. Might start doing crazy loops, take a nosedive, take a rest on a tree branch, whatever. But the sky remains there unperturbed. And when that bird is busy flying all around, up and down, that represents the experience of our thoughts and emotions changing and shifting throughout the day, which I think we're all familiar with. And when our attention lies or follows this kind of like capricious movement, understandably, it can feel really hard to remain centered. But notice that while the cardinal is doing whatever it's doing, the sky, our awareness, doesn't change. When we identify with the sky rather than the bird, or in other words, when our attention rests in awareness rather than the thought or emotion arising in that awareness, we can stay calm and centered no matter where our thoughts and feelings go. And this is important because when we're mindful of our awareness, we find our resting place, our seat, as it's sometimes called, rather than having our sense of self caught up in and carried away by the contents of our awareness. Our sense of self can remain centered in awareness itself. The second element of self compassion is called common humanity, which I have to say is probably the component that I struggled most with upon first learning self compassion myself. Common humanity reminds us that part of being human means we will face challenges, make mistakes, and experience pain, that it's part of our shared human story. Yet, it's often in these very moments of struggle that we forget this truth. We tend to personalize our pain, feel like we're the only ones going through it. We might logically know that everyone struggles, but emotionally, it feels like this should not be happening to me. And when this happens, understandably, our perspective narrows. It can start to feel like we're uniquely flawed or falling short. But in reality, what we're experiencing is simply just a part of being human. Life is full of uncertainty and imperfection, and none of us are immune to it. Remembering our common humanity helps us widen that perspective. It reminds us that we're not alone in our pain, that everyone, every stranger we pass on the street, in their own way, knows what it feels like to struggle. And this awareness does not erase suffering by any means, but it can soften it, connecting us back to a sense of belonging and shared experience. We often get scared or frustrated when parts of ourselves or our lives don't look the way that we want them to look. We can hold tightly to this idea of how things should be. And when they aren't, it can feel incredibly discouraging, like we've failed or lost control. And that's exactly where common humanity comes in. It's the reminder that every single person struggles. Every one of us feels inadequate, overwhelmed, or imperfect at times. Nothing is wrong with us for having these experiences. They're just a part of being human. And when we remember that, it softens that sense of isolation. We can see our pain not as proof that there's something broken inside of us, but as a sign that we're part of something shared and universal. And that shift, realizing I'm not the only one, can be incredibly healing. And of course, we all do not suffer in the same way or for the same reasons. Our stories are different. But knowing that pain and imperfection are a part of being human can help us feel less alone and a little bit more connected to ourselves and to others. The last element of self-kindness, excuse me, of self-compassion is one that I'm sure more than a few of us have been hesitant about since it first appeared on the screen, self-kindness. And I think when most people think of self-compassion, self-kindness is what they're thinking of. That trite, sometimes toxically positive message of just be nice to yourself. When in reality, self-kindness is so much more than that. It's more than merely stopping self judgment, but involves actively taking steps to provide ourselves with comfort. Now, there's a pretty famous, although admittedly ethically very questionable, study by Harry Harlow that showed something really striking. Baby monkeys were given the options of two mothers, one that was made of wire and provided milk, and a soft terry cloth mom that offered comfort. And the study found that the babies really only went to the wire mother for enough time to meet their nutritional needs, and then they would spend almost all of their other time with the soft and comforting mother. And what this tells us is really powerful. Comfort and connection are not extras, they're basic needs. We don't just survive on the things that keep our bodies going. We need warmth, gentleness, and safety to grow and feel okay in this world. When we practice self compassion, especially self kindness, we're offering ourselves that same source of safety, but from within. And while we can't always control the voice of the inner critic or what's happening around us as much as we'd like to, we can practice meeting ourselves with kindness. That's what helps us feel grounded, supported, and better able to keep moving forward in recovery. And what's really interesting is that this need for safety and soothing isn't just emotional, it's biological. Our brains and bodies are literally wired to seek comfort when we're in distress. When we experience kindness, whether it's from someone else or from ourselves, our nervous systems start to settle. The sense of care sends a signal to the body, I'm safe. So I want to bring it again to you guys. When someone you care about is struggling, how is your response to them different than the way that you respond to yourself when you're struggling?
People are saying they have lots of compassion for them. They're more sympathetic, understanding. They're much faster to respond, um,
Mm,
and they give other people's grace. Um, and while they can be overly critical when they make the same mistakes, they're kinder. They focus on support and
mm.
giving.
And, going back to my first question, I'm willing to bet that the tone in which you speak to someone you care about when they're struggling is very different than the way or the tone that you speak to yourself when you're also struggling. And these differences that you guys are calling out are really powerful. They point to the gap that self compassion helps us bridge. So let's take a look at what's actually happening physiologically when we practice self compassion, how it helps us shift from kind of like a threat and survival mode to a state of genuine safety and regulation. So, when we feel threatened, our threat defense system kicks in. It's one of the oldest parts of our brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain, and it's designed to keep us alive. The lion were chasing us, we would want that system online. It helps us to fight, run, or freeze to stay safe. However, most perceived threats these days are not physical ones like lions, but are threats to our self concept. When our self concept or our sense of self is threatened, such as through self criticism, the danger really becomes an inward one. But our body and our nervous system cannot tell the difference between a threat to our self concept and a physical threat like a lion. And it reacts the same way as if our survival is at stake. So instead of fighting an external danger, we start fighting ourselves. We turn that threat and stress response inward through fighting ourselves, through harsh criticism, fleeing from others, and sometimes even ourselves with isolation, or freezing in rumination and overwhelm. And really, what that means is we become both the attacker and the attacked. We know that chronic activation of the threat defense system takes a toll, physically, emotionally, and mentally. But the good news is we have another system that we can tap into, the mammalian care system. This system evolved to help us feel safe through connection and soothing. When it's activated, our body releases oxytocin and endorphins, the same chemicals that help us feel calm, cared for, and secure. We see that reflected in the Harlow study. You will not be surprised to hear me say that self compassion can activate this care system. It helps us shift out of a fight, flight, and freeze response and into a sense of safety. So rather than fighting ourselves with self criticism, self kindness helps us respond with gentleness instead of attack. Rather than fleeing from others or ourselves through isolation, common humanity helps us remember that we're not alone. And when we're frozen in rumination or overwhelm, mindfulness can help us unfreeze by gently bringing awareness to the present moment. And as you can see, the three reactions of the threat response turned inward are precisely the opposite of self compassion. So, really, every time we practice self compassion, we're actually deactivating the body's threat response and activating a care response, creating a real physiological sense of safety. And of course, this is deeply relevant to recovery. Without mindfulness, we can't see old patterns clearly, which means it's really hard to choose new ones. When we're unaware of what's happening, whether in our thoughts, body sensations, or with urges, it can become easy to feel overwhelmed by them or to kind of like move through the day on autopilot. Mindfulness helps us notice these internal experiences with less judgment, creating the awareness that allows the opportunity for real choice and change. Without common humanity, we lose the sight that our struggles with food, body image, etc., are part of the broader experience of human, excuse me, part of the broader human experience of suffering, not proof that something is wrong with us. When we personalize our pain, it can start to feel like we're uniquely broken, when in reality, we're experiencing something that everyone else who is human also has experienced in different forms. Recognizing this, connecting with this sense of common humanity often loosens shame and fosters connection. And of course, without self kindness, we remain trapped in self criticism, the very thing that strengthens our ED's hold. Self kindness helps us shift from self criticism to care, responding with our to our pain with understanding instead of judgment, which gives us safety and motivation that's needed for lasting recovery. Each element of self compassion here gives us something essential for healing and ED recovery. Together, they help the body and mind feel safe enough to engage in recovery. And do not just take my word for it. The use of self compassion to support eating disorder recovery is well documented. It's been found that people who are more self compassionate are less likely to experience symptoms associated with eating disorders and disordered eating, base their self worth on appearance, have a negative body image, feel less likely that their body or weight defines them. And when body image satisfaction does occur, self compassionate people are less likely to be overwhelmed by that distress. And I know there are many misconceptions about self compassion, some that I used to hold myself as well. So now that we know a little bit more about what self compassion is, let's talk about what it is not. And this brings it right back to you guys. In the chat, I want you to share any myths or hesitations you've heard, maybe even felt yourself, about self compassion.
that it's selfish, that I always had to love myself 100% of the
Mhm.
time, that it can feel like I'm lying to myself, or that doesn't
Yep.
solve the problem, and or it doesn't apply to me.
Mhm.
Again, the theme of selfishness, that you're helping rather than helping others, you're helping yourself, or
Yeah.
that you don't deserve it,
Yeah.
that it comes with a price.
Mm.
Um, you lose your isolation, or you feel it leaves you feeling empty,
Mm.
or you don't
Yeah.
deserve it.
Yeah. So hearing several that we're about to get into. Starting with one that many of you highlighted, one of the most common is that self compassion is weak. Um, a lot of people think self compassion is soft, but research shows us that it is actually a really powerful source of internal strength. People who practice self compassion are better equipped, better able to cope with very challenging life circumstances ranging from trauma, chronic illness, divorce, and even more than that, their resilience is shown to last over time. And we know it's not just what happens to us, but how we treat ourselves when things are hard that shapes how we heal. Self compassion means meeting our pain with courage and care, not denial or avoidance. And facing our struggles head on and responding with kindness takes real bravery, certainly not weakness. I also have heard many a times that self-compassion means I'm throwing myself a pity party. While actually, self-compassionate, if we think of it, is the opposite of self-pity. One of the key parts of common humanity, remembering that suffering is being human. Sorry, one of its key parts is common humanity, remembering that suffering is a part of being human. It's not poor me, it's we all struggle sometimes. And research shows that people high in self compassion ruminate less about their problems, and because of that, are less likely to experience symptoms of anxiety and depression. Instead of spiraling, they feel connected, knowing they're not alone in their pain. Also, heard, as some of you guys called out, self compassion is selfish, or it's going to make me selfish. And I will counter that and say, when we're stuck in self criticism, we're actually probably more self focused and have less energy for others. Self compassion frees up that energy. When we treat ourselves with care, it's understandable that we have more patience, empathy, and even generosity to give to others because we've actually attended and met our own needs. And studies show that people with self compassionate partners report healthier, more secure relationships. The irony is kind of that being kind to yourself makes you more available to others, not less. I also hear self compassion means I'm letting myself off the hook. Um, Self compassion certainly does not mean that anything goes. It means caring about your long term well being, not just avoidance of short term discomfort. Research shows self compassionate people actually take more responsibility for mistakes and are more motivated to make changes because mistakes aren't viewed as threatening and therefore don't engender shame. Instead of pretending nothing's wrong, self compassion gives us the safety to look honestly at where we've gone off track and try again without harsh judgment or self criticism. And lastly, I hear this one a lot. I need my self criticism to succeed. It is what drives me to success. Um, Self criticism also fuels fear of failure and burnout. Self compassion, on the other hand, fuels growth. Instead of asking, am I good enough? It asks, what would help me grow? When you're self compassionate, you can still aim high. You just don't attack yourself when you fall short. Research shows that self compassionate people are more resilient after setbacks, which actually makes success more sustainable over time. And lastly, as we close out this section, I really want to name that, especially in recovery, self compassion can feel incredibly uncomfortable, even impossible at first. And that discomfort does not mean in any way that you're incapable of being self compassionate. It simply means that we're bumping up against old patterns that have been trying to protect us for a really long time. So if you've noticed yourself feeling resistant as I've been talking here today, or when we're practicing later, you notice yourself thinking, this does not feel right. Please know that that is a part of recovery and process too. You are not doing it wrong. You're learning to relate to yourself in a new way, and that takes courage and patience. The goal is not perfection. It is to simply keep opening that door even a little bit each time. So now that I've hopefully got you guys all on the self compassion fan page, let's start to get into some skills that you can use to practice self compassion starting today. For the two that I'll introduce, you'll notice a QR code in the bottom left corner, and that is a direct link to a guided practice of that same skill online. So, the first one that we're going to talk about today is called the self compassion break. And this is something that we can use in everyday life, whether we're facing ED thoughts and urges, dealing with stress or worry, or that inner critic is extra loud today. Often, when we're stuck in self criticism, we see three common patterns show up. Either we're over identifying with our struggles or downplaying it. We feel like we're the only ones who struggle in this way, or the fact that we're struggling in this way is proof that there's something wrong with us. And we tend to pile on even more judgment for having the experience at all. We might think, I should have this under control, and then believe something is wrong with us when we don't. Self compassion break offers a way to step out of that spiral and turn in a different direction towards healing and kindness. It's a simple, structured practice that Dr. Neff, the founder of self compassion, likens to that of a recipe: one part mindfulness, one part common humanity, one part self kindness. And it's called a break because it interrupts the usual automatic response of self criticism in the same way that we take a coffee break or take a moment to pause throughout the day. This practice gives us permission to stop, reset, and choose a more compassionate way of relating to ourselves. The second practice I want to share is something called soften, soothe, allow. This is a skill we can turn to when emotions, thoughts, or urges start to feel really intense or overwhelming. It's based on the understanding that when we're suffering, our natural instinct is to fight what we're feeling, to push it away, hold it down, or try and make it disappear. But the more we resist, the stronger it tends to come back. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys again. What is your usual first reaction when an uncomfortable emotion, thought, or experience comes up? Do we push it away, minimize it, try and distract from it, or notice ourselves getting really pulled in by it?
People are saying they push it away, they distract themselves with substances, or they get pulled in, distract with food.
Mhm.
They get pulled in and it escalates.
Yeah. And once again, those are very natural instincts. When we experience pain, something uncomfortable, our natural instinct is often to push it away. We don't want to experience that. I like to think of it as trying to like hold a beach ball underwater. At first, we can keep it down, but it takes a lot of effort and more effort the longer we hold it down. And usually, the moment we let it go, it bursts to the surface with even more force. Our emotions work the same way. When we push them down or try and control them, they eventually come out, usually even more powerfully. Soften, soothe, allow helps us do something different. Instead of struggling with the beach ball, aka the emotion, the urge, we let it rise to the surface to meet it with gentle awareness and compassion, creating space for it to just be there. In practice, it means offering ourselves softness, soothing, and permission in moments that feel painful or overwhelming. So, after we bring awareness to our experience emotionally and sensationally, this skill calls on us to soften into the place in our body where we feel that difficult emotion, imagining letting the area around it relax, almost like we're gently placing it into warm water. We soothe ourselves, not dissimilarly from self-kindness, offering ourselves emotional compassion for the pain of an objectively difficult situation. It doesn't have to be with words. We can place our hand over the part of our body where the emotion is manifesting, imagining warmth, kindness, light flowing through your hand into your body. Lastly, we allow it to be there, making room for it, releasing the need to make it go away. Oftentimes, we repeat this cycle either as we notice the emotion or sensation changing or moving, or we go a little bit deeper each time. And this shift from resistance to acceptance can really help us feel more grounded and steady, even in the midst of an emotional storm. This is definitely one that I would advise practicing initially with the guided version, as understandably, when we're struggling with really intense emotions, it can be challenging to lead ourselves through a new skill. So, before we get into practicing a skill together, I want to show you guys an example of the skill that we'll go through, the self compassion break could look like. So, at the beginning of my own self compassion journey, I found that practicing my self compassion breaks through writing was really helpful. I would write a few lines for each element related to what I was struggling with, one bringing mindful awareness to my pain, the second describing the humanity of my situation, a third expressing warmth and kindness to myself. And I gave an example of what it could theoretically look like here. So let's quickly walk through each part together. First, mindfulness. This is the part where we simply name what's happening without judgment or analysis. For example, right now, I'm noticing the urge to use behaviors. It's about acknowledging the reality of this moment, that it's hard, maybe that it feels out of our control, without rushing to fix it or push it away. Mindfulness is the moment we say, this is what's here right now. It's about turning toward our experience rather than away from it. Next is common humanity, reminding us that pain and struggle are part of being human, not proof that something's wrong with us. Especially in recovery, it's easy to feel isolated, like everyone else has this figured out. We're the only one battling urges, ED thoughts. Common humanity says, I'm not the only one who feels this. It connects us back to others, reminding us that having urges or critical thoughts doesn't make us broken, it makes us human. Finally, self kindness, where we offer ourselves with the tone of voice we'd use with someone we love who is hurting. In the example, I acknowledge that behaviors have served a purpose. They've helped increase feelings of safety or control in the past. And with that, we gently remind ourselves that we're learning new ways to meet those same incredibly valid needs. Self kindness could sound like, this is hard, and I deserve care right now. It's choosing to meet ourselves with softness instead of shame. So, as we move into the guided practice here, keep in mind each part has a role. Mindfulness helps us see clearly, common humanity helps us feel less alone, self kindness helps us meet our struggle with warmth to support our ability to move through tough moments with care. So, now that we know what it might look like if we want to write it out, um, we'll go through a practice today so you feel confident in practicing it in real time. So, let's try it out together. As we move through this, please remember that everything I say is just an invitation. You can adapt or skip anything that doesn't feel comfortable or right for you. So I'll ask you guys to go ahead and find a comfortable upright position. You can close your eyes or gently lower them with a soft gaze. We're going to take a slow breath in through the nose, then a long, steady breath out through the mouth. Taking a moment to simply notice that we're here in this moment, choosing to pause. I want you to bring to mind a recent situation that was difficult, maybe a time when the ED voice or inner critic showed up strongly. Could be body image thoughts, experience of an urge, or a moment that you simply felt like you weren't enough. See if we can notice how that experience lives in your body right now, in this moment, as you recall it. Perhaps it's a tightness in your chest, tension in your stomach, heaviness in your shoulders. See if we can just observe it without judging it or needing it to change. Beginning with mindfulness, can we gently acknowledge what's here right now, emotionally, physically, mentally, without pushing it away or fusing with it? We might quietly say to ourselves, this is a moment of struggle. This is hard. This hurts. Notice what it feels like to simply be aware of your struggle rather than fighting it. I like to think of it as sitting with a friend who's having a difficult time. They don't want us to solve their problem, to give them advice. They just want someone to hear them and be with them as they're in pain. That's the same stance we want to take towards ourselves right now. Let's bring in some common humanity. See if we can remind ourselves other people know what it's like to feel this way too. I'm not alone in this. Struggling doesn't mean I'm broken. It means I'm human. If it feels supportive, you can place a hand over your heart or press your arms and give a little squeeze, a physical reminder that care and connection are still possible, even in hard moments. Finally, we connect with self kindness, considering what we need to hear right now, especially in response to the ED voice or inner critic. What words would feel gentle, encouraging, or protective? If nothing comes to mind, you can silently repeat, may I be kind to myself. May I give myself the compassion I need. Or you can borrow one of my personal favorites. May I make a choice that supports healing, not harm. Really let those words land. See if we notice a small shift, even 1%, maybe a softening in our breath, a slight loosening of tension, a little bit more space between you and the inner critic or ED voice. We can imagine allowing that small shift to spread throughout your experience, warmth expanding, sunlight on your skin. When you're ready, you can return your awareness to your breath in through your nose, out slowly through your mouth. Let yourself settle again. Roll those shoulders back and down. Notice the support of the ground underneath you. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes and come back to center. Thank you guys. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and experiences with this practice in just a couple moments. So, lastly, now that we have a better understanding of what self compassion is and know two skills to practice contacting it, I want to make sure that we feel comfortable in what actually to do in moments when self criticism shows up and how we can make that shift to self compassion. Um, this is important because there's no expectation that after this webinar and even practicing self compassion a couple times, that self critical thoughts or ED voice will just be absent. Self critical thoughts are often automatic, especially in eating disorders. And rather than trying to control our automatic thoughts, which unfortunately we don't have as much control over as we'd like to, we can change how we respond to them. And what this means is that self-critical thoughts can show up, but their presence doesn't mean that they automatically dominate the way that we relate to ourselves or show up in the world. Instead, the presence of self-critical thoughts can simply serve as a signal, one that demonstrates a benefit or a need to practice self-compassion. So the first step here is simply noticing when it's happening, catching that harsh voice. Next, we pause, take that mental step back, maybe even making a mental note to label the presence of our self critical thought. This helps us see the voice as a habit of thought, not a conduit for the truth. Then comes the redirect and asking, what would compassion say here? Finally, the practice is actually offering that compassion to ourselves, whether that's through words, a practice of one of these skills, a gesture of soothing, or just simply making a choice that honors ourselves and our body's needs. And as I mentioned, this process doesn't make the critical voices disappear overnight, but with practice, it shifts the balance from automatic self criticism to intentional self compassion. That's often where deeper healing with food and body can really begin. Self compassion teaches us that we can meet even our most painful experiences with care rather than fear. It reminds us that we do not need to be free from struggle to be worthy of kindness. And over time, this practice helps us move from fighting our experiences to gently tending to them, from being caught in the story to noticing how we're relating to that story. And that shift from judgment to understanding, resistance to care, is what allows recovery to deepen and our relationship with ourselves to begin to truly heal. So, before we get into Q&A, I want to leave you guys with some resources for continued learning and practice if you're interested in growing your own self-compassion practice. First bullet is Dr. Neff's website. She has a whole page of guided practices that offers audio to lead you through the practice of different self-compassion skills. Both of the skills that I introduced here today are on the guided version of that page. If you're a reader like me, her book is the second bullet, her first book. It's a great one to pick up. Lastly, if you like engaging in things more in a written format or want support with how to use a skill that isn't guided audio, Self Compassion Workbook is for you. Each chapter offers a super short reading followed by ways to practice what you just learned about yourself. It's a great resource I use with clients all the time, especially when they're new to self compassion. So, before we close out this part of our time together and move to Q&A, I want to remind you that self compassion is not something that you achieve, it's something that we practice. It's built in the small moments when we notice our pain and choose to meet them with even a little bit more care. Lastly, it is so important to name that practicing self compassion in recovery is incredibly brave work. It is not easy to turn to parts of yourself that hurt and offer kindness instead of criticism. But every time that you do, you're strengthening a different relationship with yourself. And with that, I'd love to open things up, hear what's landing for you from today's conversation, what questions are coming up as you're thinking about bringing this into your own recovery. And Molly, I'll ask you to share what comes through the chat.
Sure. To kick us off, the first question is, my challenge is that the ED seems to be kind, but this is deceitful because overeating harms me. I need to differentiate between sympathy that harms and mindfulness that heals. Do you have any suggestions?
That's a really good question. I think that I think that this speaks to the difference between, oftentimes our eating disorder um, wants us to make choices or encourages us to make choices that are in pursuit of avoidance of short term or immediate discomfort, while self compassion recognizes that sometimes we discomfort. needs to be experienced in the moment in order for long-term healing to get us to where we need to go. So I'd ask for you to notice um, when you're mindful as to kind of motivation underneath what's coming up currently. Does it feel like short term it's helping you to avoid discomfort, ultimately leading you to a longer term path of um, continuation of ED, a life that you don't want to lead, a person that you don't want to be? Or does it feel like it's potentially creating the opportunity for short term or immediate discomfort, but ultimately setting us up on the path for building the life that we want to create, one with recovery and showing up like the person we want to?
Thank you. Um, Another question, is this something a parent can use or practice with a child during an instance of criticism?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that I think absolutely you can. I would encourage you to maybe talk about self compassion with your child before introducing or kind of like talking it through with them in a moment of criticism. So they're familiar with it. That also can give you an opportunity to learn more about what parts of self compassion feel sticky for them, especially during self critical times or times when their ED is louder. Um, and ask them if they'd be willing to kind of practice this with you in difficult moments. I think that could be a very powerful ally to their recovery journey.
Wonderful. Another question, how do you recommend I utilize this when my negative voice is overpowering my self-compassionate one? I sometimes have
Mm,
a hard time checking myself.
yeah, I think that I think that we can kind of go a couple different ways here. Sometimes when our critical or ED voice is really, really loud and self compassionate voice feels like something that we can't access, we can turn to other skills that help us to feel more grounded, connected in the current moment. So we think about urge surfing. Um, uh, think about tip skills. Ice is one of my favorite. Using some of those other skills to kind of downregulate activation in our nervous system so that, yes, critical voice or ED voice is likely still going to be there, but so that it's not as overpowering as so that we cannot access our self compassionate voice. Um, and also just giving ourselves lots of patience and trial and error, knowing that it's going to feel awkward, clunky, wrong at times when we first start self compassion. And that is part of the process. So even if it feels like we're doing it wrong, striving to, especially when emotions are high or self critical voice is really loud, I find that writing out self-compassionate break can be a really grounding practice. Just trying, as I mentioned earlier, to open that door a little bit more each time. It's all about responding with care, not perfection.
So, another question about families. So, a person is sharing that they struggle with an eating disorder and self criticism, and their family members, whom they're very close with, are vocally very self critical around aging and body talk. And they're
Mm,
wondering if you have any recommendations about how they can approach family members to join us in being more self compassionate and kind to themselves as well.
mm. So we're talking about approaching these family members individually, so that they can bring kind of a more self-compassionate framework when the family is all together.
That's what it sounds like, that they are very close and they talk regularly about aging and body talk, and perhaps this impacts the person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that talking to these individuals one on one and maybe sharing, you know, uh, something that you're looking to model for your loved one is a compassionate relationship with body, aging, etc. And asking if they're open, receptive, willing to kind of like partner with you in modeling that, especially in shared family spaces. Um, if you have kind of like some self-compassionate scripts ahead of time that you can offer them. And you say, this is what one of the reframes that I've been practicing, that I've really been trying to model. And if you like it, you can take it. That can be a really easy way for them to, when they don't know what to say, or kind of like naturally notice the urge to say something critical about body or aging, have something like tangible right there.
Great. And just a point of clarification, when you say Neff, you're referring to Christine Neff?
Kristen Neff, yes. She, I think, wrote her first book on self-compassion in 2011. Um, yeah, Dr. Kristen Neff, Neff. You can easily find her online, and her website is self-compassion.org.
Great. Um, Similar sort of in the theme that the last few questions are is someone's wondering how they overcome generational patterns of criticism and perfection.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. Um, I I think that that is think that that is a day by day task, that, certainly when I think about these generational patterns, and my kind of like unlearning or breaking of them as a whole, it can feel extraordinarily overwhelming. So really bringing in our attention and focus to showing, demonstrating, living a different way of being, one that feels workable and in alignment with your values, um, in opportunities where, generational criticism would have you do something else. And bringing mindfulness and intention to these small practices that can feel kind of like a drop in the bucket when we're thinking about generations, but continued practice daily over time is really what creates that change, not only for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
Wonderful. Someone's just asking about how it seems like for them, the eating disorder gets more excessive as they get older. Um, I guess I'm assuming they think, the eating disorder behaviors and voices and wondering if that's common.
Yeah, I think that everyone's experience with ED symptoms, ED voice is different and unique. I would certainly say that this is not an atypical experience, but I will also say that no matter how loud our eating disorder voice is, no matter our stage in recovery, no matter our age, self compassion is a practice that we can turn to and offers that foundation for building a sustainable, caring relationship with body, food, and self.